publishing, legal aspects of book publishing, author, publisher, editor relations, international publishing, and finally the role of the Library of Congress in preserving and transmitting knowledge. Today's session is a panoramic view of principal publishing concerns. Our speakers, Mr. Townsend Hoops and Ms. Carol Risher, are major spokesmen for the American publishing community and represent the largest national association of American book publishers. Mr. Hoops is president of the Association of American Publishers, and Ms. Risher is director of copyright and new technology for the association. Mr. Hoops is a graduate of Yale University and was a fellow at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. He has had a distinguished career in both government and industry. As a public servant, he held several important policy positions from 1965 through 1969 in the Defense Department, including Undersecretary of the Air Force. In the private sector, he was associated with a number of prestigious firms and was vice president and director for an international management consulting firm. During the 50s, while engaged in private business, he also served as an occasional consultant to the White House, the State Department, and the Department of Defense. Mr. Hoops is also an accomplished author. His book about Vietnam, The Limits of Intervention, won the Overseas Writers' Prize in 1969 for the best book on foreign affairs. His 1973 biography, The Devil and John Foster Dulles, won the Bancroft History Prize. Mr. Hoops' associate, Carol Risher, has a background in both communications and copyright. Ms. Risher worked for AT&T's Western Electric Company in operations and public relations. She became associated with the cable television industry upon joining the American Television and Communications Corporation and later the National Cable Television Association as director of pay cable efforts. In the area of copyright, Ms. Risher worked as information officer for the National Commission on New Technological Uses of Copyrighted Works. Also, as director of copyright and new technology, she was responsible, among other duties, for directing the U.S. Office of the International Copyright Information Center and is the AAP's representative to the State Department Advisory Panel on International Intellectual Property. Ms. Risher is also a trustee of the Copyright Society of the USA. Please welcome our speakers.
Well, good morning. We're delighted to come and talk to you and tell you whatever we know about the book publishing business, and more importantly, what you might like to know that we simply miss in our initial exposition. You'll have to forgive us for the fact that this will be a somewhat informal dissertation. Indeed, I want it deliberately informal so we can engage you in a dialogue and find out what is more on your mind than on ours. One of the reasons for this is, I think, the inherent complexity of the material. We have not prepared anything formal. And secondly, we have been extremely busy in the last few weeks with a number of things that will come to light in the course of the morning. We're engaged in some serious litigation on copyright against some people who are undoubtedly good friends of yours and also of ours. Let me just start with a very broad overview of what the association is and what it does, and I think that's relevant because it is in fact a reflection of the book publishing industry. The Association of American Publishers is a trade association. We are a group a special interest group that represents a particular industry. The book publishing business, as you probably know, is not a seamless web. It's really like a loose federation of a number of different kinds of book publishers. There is not just hardcover adult fiction or mass market books. There are elementary and high school textbooks, college textbooks, a whole range of things that are known as professional books, scientific, technical, medical, legal, etc. There is a distinctive means of marketing, mostly trade books, called direct mail book clubs. There's the entire overseas market, and this is reflected in the AAP organization. We have what we call a core group, which addresses the interests of all of our roughly 300 members. And in the core, we deal with issues such as copyright, postal rates, defense of the First Amendment, new technology, funding for education, tax matters, and one or two ad hoc problems that arise from time to time and are not definable in advance. Then we have 7 divisions, which are semi-autonomous groups whose members are only those publishers interested in that particular kind of book and that particular kind of book market. And they are the units that I really just mentioned. We have the school division, which reflects the elementary high school. We have the college division. We have the mass market division. We have the general trade division. We have the, we call the professional and scholarly, which is the professional book. And we have the direct mail book club, and then we have this melange called the international division, which really is composed of a wide variety of types of publishers, but those who are interested in and directed toward the foreign markets. We have about 40 people in 2 offices. It is sometimes said that most of the publishers are in New York and most of their consequential problems are in Washington. So we're in both places. The larger office is in New York, probably 30 people there, with a large availability of conference room space. Although a quite small industry by American standards, publishing people are very gregarious, and they like to meet frequently to exchange views on everything you can think of, and therefore we run a great many meetings in New York. We provide staff support for a great many meetings. We run a kind of executive secretariat. The Washington office is much smaller, 8 or 9 people, composed of specialists in these areas that I spoke of earlier: postal, copyright, defense of the First Amendment, educational funding. We also retain a very good law firm down here, primarily for postal matters, and another law firm for tax matters. Mrs. Risher, who will speak to you later, is our specialist in copyright and new technology, and there is, of course, a real relationship between the two. You should also know, if you don't, that book publishing, I think, is important and influential in this country, but again, by industry standards, it's really very tiny. The entire book sales last year were on the order of $6 billion, which equates it to about the 49th single largest industrial corporation. 2 years ago, I think this was Dow Chemical. So it's not very large in the dollar universe, but I think it's disproportionately influential. I think, looking at your checklist here, what I'll do next is talk a little bit about First Amendment issues, which is one of the most important things we do, and then talk to you briefly about 2 or 3 of the other major functions. I think that there are 2 fundamental protections for publishing, and indeed all forms of expression in this country. One is clearly the First Amendment. The other, in our case, is copyright. Copyright we often refer to as the Magna Carta of publishing, and in a broad sense, publishing companies could not exist, could not predict the future or protect the works they produce without it, as you well know. And we see vivid examples of this when we turn to problems in the third world, where we spend a fair amount of effort combating piracy, usually not in the courts, usually by negotiation with governments. And I'll come back to that. We have had for a long time what we call the Freedom to Read Committee, which is our Defense of the First Amendment Committee. And we spend a fair amount of money and a great deal of effort every year in collaboration with other interested parties like the motion picture industry, the librarians, the newspaper and the magazine publishers. And we have a network monitoring system which is designed to alert us to encroachments on the First Amendment that take place in particular localities where, let's say, citizen pressure will cause books to be taken out of bookstores or removed from library shelves. Or we're talking about here, I would call it the blue nose syndrome, where it usually occurs in small towns where you have people who are offended by either the title or usually the title or the cover of a book. Most of the books that they oppose they have never read, or at least never read in their entirety. Being alerted to those, we sometimes sue or we support a suit by the offended party, perhaps the bookseller, perhaps a library. We had an interesting case in the school group a couple of years ago called the Island Trees case, where high school students as a group brought a case against the school board, and we intervened in that case as an amicus, as a friend of the court, filed a brief, and I think, as you know, the matter went to the Supreme Court with a mixed decision. But we do a great deal of that, and we regard it as one of the most important things we do. Let's talk briefly about international copyright for a moment. We're engaged with our British colleagues in a suit against a notorious Singapore pirate, and we're really testing the adequacy of the Singapore law, which is derived from the British colonial days. We will know in a few months whether the law is adequate from our point of view or whether we have to go back to the Singapore government and ask for a strengthening of the law. We've had some success in the Philippines, where by an agreement with the government, so long as we introduce our texts, our books of any kind, below a certain price level, they will be very severe on the reprinters. If our prices drift above this level, they will in effect exonerate the reprinters and let them reprint our works. So we have an incentive to contribute, and it's one that we take seriously and we don't regard as particularly unfair. All of the third world countries, as you know, are terribly concerned about their illiteracy problems and do not have money for the large volume of textbooks or indeed reading materials of every kind that are needed to alleviate that problem. So we regard that as a fair contribution by the developed world to the underdeveloped world. And we have similar arrangements worked out on a somewhat ad hoc basis with South Korea, India, and we are in negotiation with some others. On the postal front, as you might expect, we have done nothing much better than to fight a rearguard action against a glacier, I would say, for the last 10 years. Postal rates have risen inexorably since that brilliant decision in 1970 to create the postal office as a separate government corporation, to free it from civil service wage scales, and to, in effect, give the postal unions a almost unlimited leverage in driving up costs of running the Postal Service. Our interest is basically the special book rate, the fourth class rate. And I think, given all of the circumstances, we have done better than we might have expected. But it is a painful rearguard action. It's something that we feel we can't abandon, but we are not victorious in the field. With education for funding, we have had successes, but of course the recession has pinched everyone. We're very interested in sustaining and indeed increasing that portion of total support for education which comes from the federal government, and that's what we do here in Washington. It has been historically about 7% of the total. I don't know exactly what the figure is at the moment, how far it has dropped in the Reagan period, but it has certainly dropped. And of course, the states, because of their own financial stringencies, have not been able to take up the slack in all cases. So there has been a serious shrinkage of funds available to support education. And this is of a direct monetary concern to the school textbook publishers, because it means that there are fewer funds for buying textbooks. And when school administrations locally are pinched, foregoing the purchase of new textbooks is usually one of the easiest and most obvious means of saving. So we're very concerned there. The education funding problem, of course, particularly in the textbook area, extends beyond Washington and causes us to have to deal with almost all of the state governments. Our organization here is less comprehensive than it might be. The lack of comprehensiveness reflects a lack of money. We cover 5 or 6 of the very largest states with either a salaried or a retained representative. In some cases, it's a lawyer, and a very good one. We cover California, Florida, Texas, Michigan, New York, and maybe 1 or 2 others. Ohio, I think, in that way. But it's a constant struggle, and I'm afraid that we're faced with probably a shrinkage of the school textbook market, both because the demographics are turning down and because the funding is going to be very, very tight. And school systems, I think, are going to limp along on old and obsolescing texts in many cases, simply because they have no alternative. I will leave a detailed discussion of copyright to Mrs. Risher, who is more competent than I. But we here are very active. We were instrumental over a period of years in securing the passage of the 1976 law, which is the charter on which, of course, you are working. We spent a good deal of effort in giving comments to the Register for his consideration in rendering the report to the Congress that has now just been delivered. And I think we, on the whole, are very pleased, really very, very pleased with that report, and we'll try to deal with it responsibly as it surfaces in the Congress this coming session. We have been very active in copyright litigation over the last year or so in 2 areas. And again, I will leave the details here to Mrs. Risher, but we have tried to seek agreements with large corporations that have large research libraries and which systematically copy mostly journal publications, but other scientific and technical publications. The practice generally is to buy, let's say, 1 subscription and copy it in 45 or 50 or 100 to their various research people. We have persuaded some of those corporations that this is a clear violation of the law, and have worked out agreements which she will tell you about. This has been on the whole quite successful, and primarily I think because large corporations do not wish to see themselves perceived as violators of the law, and by and large the money involved in paying adequate royalties to the copyright holders here is not an onerous burden for them. More recently, we have tackled the question of large-scale illegal photocopying in academia, and you may be aware of a suit, a complaint that we filed against New York University shortly before Christmas, and Mrs. Risher will tell you where we stand on that. I think I will leave matters right there as my opening statement, in the hope that I've given you some clues as to what aspects of this dialogue you might like to pursue, and just ask her to give you a more detailed description of where we are and what we do with regard to copyright enforcement, and the tremendous complexities of new technology that face us across the whole communication spectrum.
In 1979, a management audit done by several publishers on the board of AAP recognized the need to get the trade association into new technology. No one was sure at that point what new technology meant, but there was clearly something out there that publishers wanted to know more about. We began to monitor what was going on in new technologies that might have an effect on publishers, and to get publishers involved in a lot of the experiments that were taking place in video text and teletext. Teletext was broadcast text that would go to a television set specially equipped with a decoder so people in their home could read on the television screen. This was suitable only for short messages because the television screen can only accommodate 20 lines and 40 characters across. But nonetheless, if people were reading off their television screen, our members, the purveyors of the printed word, should get their words on that screen. So we got publishers involved in teletext experiments and video text, which is the two-way interactive end of that, and started to look at computer software and online databases. The culmination of these efforts resulted in a recent board decision by AAP to, in effect, reflect the change in the definition of publishing. We've been the Association of American Publishers, representing book and journal publishers. We are still the Association of American Publishers, but now these publishers represent software publishers, database publishers, video disc publishers, videotape publishers, and any other new technology that may come along. Because our members, our primarily book and journal publishers, are now getting into new forms and formats of delivering the message, you in the Copyright Office are going to be getting more and more new formats for deposit, and you may be demanding more for acquisition. We have about 18 elementary and high school textbook publishers who are now developing computer software, computer-assisted instruction for the LHI market. We have an equal number, sometimes there's crossover because some publishers are both LHI and college textbook publishers, but we have an equal number, about 18 to 20, of our members who are developing software for the college market. The college market is quite different from the school market. For the school market, a publisher sells software to the school, either to the district or to the teacher, and all the students access it through terminals on campus. The college market is a much more lucrative market because each college student is seen as a potential buyer of the software. There are now 4 colleges that are asking their entering freshmen to come in with terminals. The bookstores are in fact selling terminals and small computers. We went to the National Association of College Stores annual meeting, all of the college bookstores, and there were over 7 booths just selling handheld computers, little small printout computers, like the handheld calculator, but now they're capable of programming in BASIC, capable of writing graphs and charts and doing all kinds of homework for the student. And the salesmen there were saying, remember the days that the engineering students walked around with slide rules on their belts? Now you're going to see everybody carrying a handheld computer. So the potential market is much more lucrative now at the college level, but our members are looking at both. They're looking at tape, they're looking at discs. Many of the journal publishers are doing experiments now with online database, full text of a journal. Have a journal in electronic format for transmission to potential readers, viewers, libraries, full text online. Matthew Bender did not really an experiment. They believe so strongly in the power of the Lexis system that they input the entire Matthew Bender collection, all of the legal books, all of the loose leaf services, into the Lexis system. They did it not to hurt their print sale, but because they believed it would help their print sale. By having full text of all the Matthew Bender services in an online service that is searchable by keyword. Keyword, you put in dog, man, bites, and say any place that those three words come together within 15 words of each other, please give me the citation, and you get every case where a dog bites a man or a man bites a dog, and it all comes out. Matthew Bender said if we put all of our services in, then the users of the Lexis system will see references to several Matthew Bender services and will go to read and research in the printed volume, because it's much easier to read the printed volume. Their reason for putting their full text online was to use the Lexis system as a finding tool, as a cross-reference, and they think it will spur their print sales, they think it will spur the use of their print product. So this is something that we're all watching. It's happening now. The ease with which Matthew Bender took their print product into the Lexis system was affected. I don't know how to, it was more easy because they had their full text stored in machine-readable format. They created their text from composition tapes. So they stripped out all the codes and were able to do a direct input to the Matthew Bender system, through the Lexis system. Not everybody is so lucky, and some publishers are now using systems like the Kurzweil equipment, which recognizes each character and converts the character to machine-readable format for input. But this is much more expensive, much more time-consuming, and much more error-prone. The New Technology Committee of AAP is working now on two very important projects that will affect our membership and may again affect all of you. One is an industry-wide generic coding. Right now, when an author creates a manuscript on a word processor or a microcomputer, that manuscript has in it machine-specific codes. If you're using a linear puts certain dits and dots to say tab. Different dits and dots mean carriage return. Different dits and dots mean the paragraph should be in italics or should be set off in quotation marks or should be single space versus double space. Or as you're typing, you push a button on your word processor and it says this phrase should be centered on the page. Well, each of these codes are machine specific. Lanier has one set, Wang has one set, IBM has one set, Lexicron has one set. And so if an author writes a manuscript on a word processor, even though it's in machine readable on a 5-inch square floppy disk or on a computer tape, it cannot be sent anyplace else except to a compatible machine. Our publishers are getting calls from authors. We're doing our manuscript on a word processor. Can't we just give you the floppy disk? Can't we just send you the tape? And the publishers say, no, give us the hard copy. And then when the manuscript comes to the publisher re-keystrokes it into the publishing system and makes the edits and makes the changes and sends it back to the author for author's approval, and then it comes back, and the author has to proofread it, and the publisher has to proofread it, and then it goes to the compositor. And the compositor has to re-keystroke it again. And then the galleys have to go back to the author for proofreading. So each time that manuscript is retyped, there's more opportunity for human error, there's more opportunity for problem. The system that we are trying to develop, and we're trying to do it with every organization, with cooperation of the American National Standards Institute and the Printing Industry of America. The compositors have already told us they want it. The hardware people want it. Everybody wants it, and it'll take a long time to do, is an industry-wide generic coding system so that an author can create a manuscript on a word processor using our system, so that there are no machine-specific codes. You just type, and then you put some kind of a delimiter. For instance, you'll put a slash mark and a period, and then after that you'll put a CH for chapter heading, or slash mark period T for title, or slash mark period P1 for paragraph, or something that will then be, composition codes will be put around that to make the system make paragraphs and chapter headings and titles. But the author will make the manuscript in machine-readable format, and then will be able to telecommunicate it to any machine at the publisher. He'll use, I don't know how familiar you are with the new technology, but many computers have a little coupler. It looks like a receptacle for a telephone handset, and you put this in what's called a modem, and then over the telephone line, the dits and dots and dashes come into a computer. So the author has his manuscript in machine-readable format, picks up the telephone and calls his publisher. The publisher takes the receiver and puts it in the modem, and there goes the manuscript right into the publisher's system, which doesn't have to be machine compatible. The publisher then can display on the screen, put in the copy edits, put in the composition codes, and then call up the compositor, who will take the telephone, put it in the modem, and there we go again. One set of keystrokes. No need to proofread multiple times. No need to send things back and forth. When I discussed this with the Math Association of America at the beginning of this month in Denver, several math professors who were also authors of textbooks said what would be more helpful to us, or equally helpful to us, would be if the compositor could then send that tape back to us, the author, to use for the re-edition. When 4 years later or 6 years later, we are bringing out a new version of the textbook and updating and realizing that this section doesn't work as well as we like, but this section has to be expanded. Then we're working from the same machine-readable tape again, making the changes, and there's the system. That can be built in. That's one of the projects the New Technology Committee is working on, an industry-wide standard for generic coding, for electronic manuscripts. This will also make it possible for those publishers who want to take a book product and make it an online product to do so with a minimal of effort. Because if you have the information in machine-readable format, you can go anywhere with it. It will also be possible for the publisher who has the machine-readable manuscript to turn it into a disc. Now, the reason I mention discs now is I know many of you are familiar with what the Library of Congress is doing. The National Library of Medicine is doing the same thing a different way. The libraries say we're faced with a tremendous problem of preservation. Manuscripts are deteriorating on our shelves. They're falling apart. Books are falling apart. Journals are falling apart. They're crumbling. They're embrittled. If they're not falling apart, all you need is for somebody to take them off the shelf and open them, and they'll crumble and turn to dust. And we're running out of space. Optical digital disc, read by laser, has the capacity for an incredible amount of data compression. On one disk, the size of a 33 LP record, one disk, you can store 316 books, 10 shelves worth of books, that whole wall worth of books on one 33 LP. I was asked to frighten the Library of Congress. Sometimes I am preposterous, and attending a full-day session on this optical disc project, I listened to all of the presentations and then got up and said, there are 5 exclusive rights of the copyright holder: the right to make copies, the right to authorize derivative works, the right to distribute copies, the right to perform, and the right to display. And the Library of Congress project, as outlined, threatens to violate all 5 of the exclusive rights of the copyright holder. Because input into the disc is an infringement if done without permission. Display, if done a certain way, is an infringement. Performance for the video works is an infringement. The disc may be perceived as a derivative work, which could be an infringement. That may be stretching it, but it could be a new product. Distribution, copies being printed out at remote locations, all of these things. And the Library of Congress has said to us, very glad you brought that up, and we'd be happy to work with you. We then had a tour of the National Library of Medicine, which is developing its own optical disc project. They're using their Lister Hill Research Center to create the same type of object, optical disc. In phase 5 of the National Library of Medicine project, there will be a device that looks somewhat similar to a jukebox or a multi-compartment shelf. It'll stand about yay high with 100 compartments. In each compartment will be a laser reader, and the discs will be stored there. This jukebox will be connected to multiple terminals, let's say for the sake of argument 20. 20 different people can be reading the same material. What will happen is you push an access number and say, I want to see document X. The laser reader will quick read it, and it's faster than any of us can read, and in a sense, suck out the information and store it in a buffer right next to the terminal. Then a user can sit at the terminal and slowly read, or push a button and copy, or do anything the user wants. And these terminals don't have to be on location, they can be at remote locations. The beauty, from NLM's viewpoint, of the jukebox is that nothing is ever taken off the shelf. So nothing is ever misfiled, nothing is ever damaged or lost. They have complete and total system integrity. The book publishers are concerned about this system. And in fact, I'll mention 2 other things on disc, and then I got a lot to say about copyright. We have a meeting February 3rd with both the National Library of Medicine and the Library of Congress, or with each, I guess, because we're meeting first for 3 hours with LC, and then we're meeting for 3 hours with NLM, to cooperate. We are going to do with each library a joint project with LC, which we like very much, because really we work very well with the Library of Congress, and the Library of Congress uses only one box on the interlibrary loan form. The Library of Congress obeys the copyright law, and they're very sensitive. And Bill Welsh has said any material that goes into the disc, even though this is a model project, will go in with permission sought. And so we feel very good. So when we meet with the Library of Congress, we're going to talk about 3 possibilities. Can we perhaps, for one of the discs in your model project, give you the information in machine-readable format? What would we have to do to get the information there? That's one area of exploration. Another, could we develop some type of an indexing system, rather than just the title and the author and the subject matter, something a little bit more involved, so that a researcher who's doing research on a part of a book will be led to that chapter or those pages that are germane to the research. This might mean for publishers a whole new way to sell books, to sell parts. It's the way journal publishers have been selling reprints for many years, but book publishers have not done it because there has been no comprehensive indexing system. But maybe this is something, and maybe this is the time to start looking at some type of comprehensive indexing system, some type of standards, so that the books in the Library of Congress Optical Disc Project are even more useful to the readers than they are now as books. That's a second part of the project that we're going to look at. And the third is just helping the Library of Congress clear permission, because AAP sometimes takes that role. We feel that as long as people are asking permission, we want to work with them rather than against them. And so if a particular publisher doesn't respond in a timely fashion, I do call up and threaten compulsory licenses and all kinds of things and say, you can say no, you can say yes, you can do anything you want because you're the copyright holder, but please answer. So we may just lend our good offices to help the library in getting the permissions to get the books or the journals in the system for this model project. With the National Library of Medicine, we would hope to do the same thing, but we're not so sure how that's going to go. So we thought we'd start with LC and see how wonderfully the morning goes, and then be ready for the afternoon. I'll make one mention of the Adonis project in case any of you don't know about it. 4 publishers, 4 European publishers, Springer Verlag, Pergamon, Elsevier, and Blackwell, have approached the British Library Lending Division, who is lending 1 million copies, lending, who's photocopying and sending out for just a service fee with no copyright royalty, 1 million copies a week or more of copyrighted journal material. And these 4 publishers said, you know, BLLD, we've been complaining about what you've been doing for a long time, and you don't seem to hear our complaints. So let's be more practical. In order for you to make photocopies and send them throughout the world, what you have to do is have a huge staff that goes into the stacks and locates the material. That takes time. Then that staff takes the material over to a copying machine, and that takes time. Then they make the copies and they fold them and they put them in the envelope, and the envelope has to be addressed, and that takes time. And then they send the envelopes out, and there's a postage cost, and that takes time. We have a system that will save you a lot of administrative burdens, a lot of nightmares, a lot of time, and a lot of money. We will have the world's journal literature, or the most popular journal literature, in an optical digital disc that's capable of high-speed printing with a non-impact laser printer, that easily searches just by the push of a button, and we will fill all the BLLD requests. The only thing we want from you is a recognition of copyright liability. We would like you, BLLD, to include in the charge to the customer for this service photocopy royalties for the copyright holders. The British Library says, we're listening. And Adonis is right now, with a paid executive director, approaching U.S. publishers, and AAP hosted a meeting in New York last week. It was the first time American journal publishers were presented with the opportunity to participate in the Adonis system, under the theory that if you participate, you will now get royalties for something the BLLD is giving away for free. So this is a third optical disc project, but this one is not a model, this one is not a test, this is a real business decision, and real dollars are changing hands. And the idea is to have the Adonis disc operational in 1984. Okay. There are 3 areas. I wear 2 hats, I have 2 titles, but I have 3 areas in which I have to keep my eyes open. The third area that isn't technology or copyright is government use and abuse of copyrighted materials. Ever since I've joined AAP, we've had on our agenda getting the government to adopt a government-wide copyright policy, both concerning the existence of copyright in government-funded work performed by the private sector. If somebody has a grant from the government, that doesn't mean that the government owns that work or that that work is not eligible for copyright. We believe that a researcher in the private sector is just getting catalyst money from the government. Doesn't matter how much they pay, his brains, her brains are their own, and therefore the work should be eligible for copyright. And that copyright, of course, can be transferred to a publisher or used in any way. The government is not consistent on that, and people doing work for the government don't know from one minute to the next whether they're going to be able to get copyright, whether they're not going to be able to, and a subcontracting agency sometimes says to the grantee, you may hold copyright, and then they find out that the parent executive branch agency has a policy against it. The government also has some cute tricks. They sometimes say to a grantee, we will give you the money to do this work if you claim copyright and then grant it to us, the government, so we can get a royalty every time we sell your work. This is something that I've heard Ms. Peters talk about at great length as to whether or not that was the intention of the clause in the copyright law that says the government can hold copyright by assignment. We have also talked to the government about competing with us, and we keep an eye on what they're doing because frequently the government takes the same product that a private sector publisher is publishing and they put it out by GPO and undercut the price, and they do it because the terms of the NSF grant, for instance, say that in addition to publication by the private sector, you must give a copy to NTIS for use by the government, and NTIS then goes into direct competition with the poor author and publisher who did not know this was going on. We tell the publishers it's going on, and we whittle away at the government efforts on the side. Now copyright. Yes?
Who are they making copies for? NTIS? Are they making copies for the general public?
Yes, for the general public. You see, the government asks for a royalty distribution for government purposes, royalty-free distribution for government purposes. But they define government purposes as dissemination to the public. And that's the purpose of the government, after all. They're not the private sector, they're the public sector. And so each of you should be able to get a copy. Of course, our argument is that our member publishers know far better who the market is, how to package the information, how to market the information. When a researcher does a research project, they have a huge voluminous tome that explains the research with all the attachments and all of the results. And this is what is given to NTIS. When that same tome is given to a publisher edits it, puts it out for peer review, gives it credibility, does a tremendous amount of value-added work, and makes a very nice, handy, readable volume. The problem is that some publishers have then gone out and done a magnificent job of marketing this volume, and clever people out there in the public said, now that we know about it, why should we pay the publisher's price when we can get the work from NTIS for less? And so we find ourselves competing with our friend the government, with our government. I'm now going to turn to copyright. I had the good fortune of being at the Supreme Court on Tuesday to hear the Betamax argument. I say good fortune in one sense because it was the most exciting thing that's happened in a long time, to be there in the awesome Supreme Court building and see the honored justices. But I also heard Sony's lawyer try to make a point with the justices that since only Disney and Universal sued, obviously the other copyright holders don't really care if their works are infringed on Betamax, that the existence of the suit is the only thing that shows people care, and therefore anybody can use his Betamax or comparable equipment and off-air videotape anything from any copyright holder other than Walt Disney and Universal. I made a mental note to run home and run back to the office, it's my home, run back and tell Mr. Hoops that our litigation effort should be beefed up because they only recognize litigation as enforcement, which is not the way we want to go. But I will say that since the new law went into effect in January 1, 1978, AAP has never been out of litigation. The first suit was brought against Noman Corporation in 1979. In 80, we sued Tyco. In 81, we sued Cyanamid. In 82, we sued Squibb. And now, 83, we're in pending litigation against New York University. We've never stopped our efforts because enforcement is very important. It's like the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. If there's no threat of police, all the signs in the world aren't going to stop people from speeding. But if you think that somewhere over your shoulder somebody is watching you photocopy, you may be a little bit more cautious, and that's what our efforts do. And it's something we do as the trade association. We coordinate the suits. Our members feel so strongly about copyright that we fund them, either sometimes through an assessment. Each company puts in some money, sometimes through general budget, sometimes through voluntary contributions. We've used all kinds of funding, but we continue to litigate to show that enforcement does matter and publishers do care about copyright. We also work in the legislative forum. Last year, we were there testifying when Senator Cochran tried to amend the copyright law concerning work for hire. They wanted to take out collective works as a category of specially commissioned work for hire works. We fight the erosion of copyrights whenever we see it. We have tried to get the manufacturing clause taken out of the copyright law, both legislatively And we are now, we've gotten permission from the court to intervene in the Authors League Irwin Karp suit against the Register of Copyrights and the Commissioner of Customs and the Secretary of the Treasury. So although we love all of you, we'll see you in court. The Register's report is a magnificent document, and we're very pleased to see that. One of our contributions in our filing with the Register was the umbrella statute. I don't know if any of you are aware of that. I'm sure you've all read the report, but out of 400 pages, there may be some things you missed. We have heard the library community over the years, the actual, real working librarians, telling us, we want to obey the law, we need guidelines, we wish we knew what systematic is, we really care, we'll do anything we can, and then we've had the library association say other things. The working librarians have also said to us, we would like to use CCC. We would like to use advanced licensing systems. We are tremendously frustrated when we have on our shelf journal literature, and one of our researchers comes in and says, may I have 6 copies for my research team of an article, and we cannot walk over to the machine and make a copy because that particular journal is not in CCC and does not have any advanced licensing system. And in fact, when we wrote to them, their response was, you'll have to buy reprints, or you'll have to write to University Microfilm for reprints, or you may only get copies from the Institute for Scientific Information in Philadelphia. And we, the libraries, are frustrated because we're participating in all the existing systems, and yet we have these journals on our shelf that are really useless to us because we can't make copies when our researchers need them. We've heard these complaints, and and in 1977, AAP, in testimony before Cantu, said we would be prepared to consider an amendment to the copyright law that would provide some protection for you libraries that really are making every good effort to use materials and use all the advanced systems and pay the royalties. And since we made this statement in 1977, and we only tell the truth, we decided when people were asking us about it that maybe we could pull together a small working group and figure out how to implement that. What does this mean? What are we going to do? And we, with 4 corporate librarians, 4 librarians in for-profit corporations, sat down with for-profit and not-for-profit journal publishers and drafted something we call the umbrella statute. In a nutshell, what the umbrella statute does is it says that if a user participates in an all available advanced licensing schemes, an advanced licensing program, multiple publisher advanced licensing program, and if that user then makes copies of journal material, scientific, technical, medical, and business journal material that does not offer either an advanced licensing program, like by themselves even, they could say, you can pay an incremental subscription price, and in exchange for X dollars, you'll be allowed to do all your copying you want, or participate in something like the CCC, then the good user making the photocopy of the bad publisher's work, the non-cooperative publisher's work, will only be liable for actual damages should the publisher sue for an infringement. The statutory damages will no longer be available. The injunctive relief will be no longer available. The lawyer's fees will be no longer available. That, in a nutshell, is the umbrella statute. We suggested it, and we're very pleased to see that the Register concurred and felt that it's a workable concept. They may need some rough edges ironed out, and our own members have said there's some rough edges maybe to be ironed out, and the users have said there's some rough edges to be ironed out, but the concept is sound, because the alternative, frankly, would be a compulsory license, and no one wants a compulsory license. The Register's report also says, practically every other page, that the best way to resolve differences is for the parties to negotiate. And the Association of American Publishers, oops, I've been cut. I've been told not to say a word. Could we take a break now, please? Is that all right? I'm just going to mention 5 issues very quickly on which we have concern, and not get into them because I know you have a lot of questions, and I'd like to return the podium to Mr. Hoops and then allow him to say some words and then questions to begin, because we'll get to all of the gut issues through questions. With the Copyright Office regulations, there are things that we're very concerned about, and we have filed comments before the Copyright Office, and we're reviewing the compendium of practices, and we're getting complaints from our members about certain issues that we're going to be raising with you if we haven't already. One of our concerns is that currently, under the new law, there is a question in the minds of publishers as to what is the treatment and protection of dust jackets. During the old law, we understand that in the examining division, when a book came in, the dust jacket was taken off and thrown in a box someplace, and the book was then processed as a book. But some of those dust jackets have on them original artwork, some of them have on them original text material, and the publishers want to know whether they should have a separate registration or whether the registration will treat all the parts of the collective work, including the dust jacket, and what is the role of that. We would like to have the Copyright Office consider a group registration for under group registration for related works, accepting periodical publishers' journals en masse. If you have a weekly, take the 12 issues that came out in the first quarter, because it's within the 3 months requested by the statute, and let those 12 issues be on one filing fee with one $10 fine and one form. The publisher is the same, the title of the journal is the same. It's something that would make it possible. Many of our members are considering dropping registration entirely because of the cost for these publishers, especially the not-for-profit publishers. This would be a way to ensure the public record while giving a break to the publishers. We're coming. You'll hear from us. Another is the filing of transfers. Many publishers receive transfers in such volume from all of their authors for all of their publications that in 1 year they drown in a sea of paper. They, in order to survive, microform these transfer documents so that they can keep them in a manageable storage space. Unfortunately, if there's litigation, the Copyright Office will not accept the microform because it's only certified by one party and not by both, since the original signatures were on the original piece of paper that was destroyed. We would like the Copyright Office to consider accepting microform certified by the publisher as being a true document for recordation purposes. On contracts, publishers are loath to file total contracts because it reveals all of the royalty arrangements and special deals. In the real estate industry, I'm told that there is a short form that says the buyer is buying from the seller or the seller is transferring to the buyer according to the terms on the attached document, and all you file is the top document. So our publisher members are considering some kind of form. The author and publisher agree that a transfer is taking place, or this is a contract as elaborated in the attachment, but the attachment doesn't get filed with the Copyright Office. This could make life very simple for publishers who want to file contracts. The other that I can't stay away from mentioning, and then I promise I'll sit down. We've gotten a lot of complaints about you guys. The overzealous, greedy Library of Congress Acquisition Department that is using 407 to create economic hardship on publishers. I got a call from a congressman himself, member of Congress. I have a constituent who received a demand from the Library of Congress that will cause him to go bankrupt if he has to comply with the demand. It is a special multi-volume work that we sell for $100,000 a person, and the Library of Congress said they wanted 2 copies. We have another publisher who wrote to us and said, we have a special edition book signed originals. We only printed 200 copies. We got $2,500 from each subscriber before we printed them. The Library of Congress made us return $5,000 to 2 paying customers. We had to bump 2 paying customers to comply with that greedy Library of Congress demanding special edition signed original works. And when we said to them, we'll give you the trade copy, the Library of Congress said, oh no, best edition is best edition. It goes on. I have a lot of horror stories, and if we have to change the law, if we have to come forward and do something, we're looking at all possibilities. It's saying that the library has to pay at least cost on special edition works, or if it's worth something more than X, the library has to pay X if they're going to get it, or if they have to pay for an overrun, because this is creating a very serious problem among our member publishers who are losing money because of complying with demand on the special edition, limited edition works. I have to tell you because it comes down to all of you guys. The other thing is foreign journals. We have publishers of journals that are published abroad, printed abroad, and sent from abroad to individuals here, and because the company may have an arm or leg or foot in the United States, all of a sudden this American part is served with a demand and told by the Copyright Office Acquisitions Department in very strong language, we'll see you in court if you don't comply. Not only do they say we'll see you in court if you don't comply, but we want every back issue to 1977. Well, some of the publishers don't even have them back that far, and one publisher had to spend over $8,000 to buy on the street from reprint dealers to dig up old back retrospective issues because of the fear of the Library of Congress beating up on them because of the demand. We have talked to foreign governments. We have talked to the American State Department. We don't want to see retaliation by all the foreign libraries, the national libraries of every country in the world, some of whom ask for 10 copies, some of them ask for 15 and more. We don't want to see retaliation, and one of the things that unfortunately for both of us, our members are considering is foregoing copyright as a way to get around the mandatory deposit requirement. That's not something either of us want. So be aware that you guys are doing some things that we don't think are 100% wonderful, and you'll hear from us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to touch on 2, maybe 3 subjects, some of which have already been alluded to, and then I hope we really will go to a question period and find out what's on your mind. But just to take up where Carol left off on her last point, it seems to us a kind of self-evident and sad fact that copyright as a concept is increasingly difficult as an adequate concept to protect these very real but intangible property rights that are embodied in literary and other informational printed works. One wonders, really, looking down the road 4 or 5 years, and looking at the myriad of complicated electronic devices where information will be delivered electronically, where there will be 1,000 opportunities to take this information out of the air without asking any permission. One wonders, really, whether we need ultimately some new intellectual construct, something other than copyright. And I don't know at the moment what that is, but some of us are trying to think about it. Take the Betamax case. Copying off air in that way by homeowners is a clear violation of the present law. I don't think there's any question about it. On the other hand, it's very unlikely that the Supreme Court is going to send to jail 60% of the TV homeowners. So there's going to continue to be home copying, and some adjustment is going to have to be made in the law, presumably in the direction of compensation of the copyright owners. What has been considered, as you perhaps know, but I don't know whether it's adequate, is some kind of surtax on blank cassette tapes when they're purchased by the homeowner. Well, so much for that issue. I wanted to touch on 2 more. You had in your checklist, Mr. Rosenblatt, the question of the rise of the conglomerates, and I just wanted to say a a word about, about that. The issue has died or tended to recede over the last 3 or 4 years. It was very hot in 78, 79, and 80, when there were a number of rather exciting mergers and takeovers in the communications area, and they included book publishing. But the fact nevertheless remains, and I really want to emphasize this, that book publishing is one of the most open, diverse businesses in the United States, and one with the greatest ease of access. You can become a book publisher with very little capital for several reasons. First of all, you can contract out almost everything except the finished manuscript, almost literally everything. And secondly, you're committed only to that one book. It's not like starting a magazine where you immediately take on enormous financial obligations to subscribers over a long term. If that one book fails, you can go out of business the following morning. As a consequence, there's a very interesting phenomenon in this business. There are about 100 new book publishing companies created every year. And while 2/3 of those go out of business somewhere over the lifespan of the founder, a third remain, and that third usually merges with other small ones and grow larger and survive. So there is this marvelous gestation at the bottom here, as well as merger at the top. And in terms of relative concentration, book publishing is not a concentrated industry. The 50 largest companies dominate about 75% of the market. This compares to other industries where the 50 largest companies, if there are 50 companies, will have typically 95, 96, 98% of the market. Moreover, the 50 largest publishing companies are very, very competitive. When you compare these to oil with 7 companies, or automobiles with 2 or maybe 2.5, and cement with 8, it's a highly competitive operation. The Authors Guild made an interesting statement 3 or 4 years ago when we were arguing this issue before the Federal Trade Commission. And it was a peculiar argument as we analyzed it, because they seemed to be saying that it is in the interest of authors to have relatively small, relatively weak, but independent companies. The assumption being that only small companies would choose quality manuscripts. The larger the company, the greater erosion in literary and intellectual quality. Economically, of course, that makes no sense at all, because it is, in fact, the larger companies that are in a position to take the risks on first novels and untried writers, and it's the very small companies that, by and large, cannot afford a failure. And I think the record shows that companies, large companies like Random House, Harper & Row, Simon & Schuster, who have made significant commitments to their trade departments, in fact, publish a lot of fiction, a lot of new fiction, and are willing to take their lumps on 40 or 50% of those books. They assume that they're going to lose or just barely break even on a new author, but they hope that they will nurture that career, and by the 3rd novel or the 3rd book, both the author and the publisher will be somewhat happier. So much for that issue. I just wanted to talk about one more final issue, and this is in response to a very interesting question during the intermission. This is why are we in the suit against NYU? Do we just regard it as nuisance value, or do we regard it as a test of the law? We're quite serious about it. And let me give you a brief bit of history. Over the last 3 or 4 years, we have been frustrated by informal efforts we have made with other universities. We have sat down with university councils. We have brought to their attention what we thought were fairly compelling photocopying violations by their faculties. And we've said, would you please sit down with us, draft some guidelines that indicate to the faculty what is legal and what is not, and will you, as a university, assume some responsibility for monitoring compliance? And while no one said no to us, they all said, in effect, we have more important things to worry about, and it was low on their list of priorities. And therefore, they didn't give us the attention we thought the problem deserved. We had also, as Mrs. Risher said, sued 2 or 3 campus copy shops without touching either the faculty or the university. And while we'd won those suits, the practical benefits had been very limited. They did not go beyond those particular shops. It could not be construed in any sense as a class action suit with wide application to other copy shops. So when we came to NYU, we thought it was important to create a precedent. We developed some compelling evidence against the unique copy shop, which is on the edges of the NYU campus. They were making large numbers of what we call creative anthologies, books, really, a chapter from this book and 2 chapters from that book, ordered by a professor, collated, bound, and sold by the shop to the students in particular courses. So we had that evidence. We traced back to the particular faculty members who were giving the instructions, and then we ultimately took the next logical jump and said the university is really responsible here and must be responsible because this is a violation of the law. The university would certainly accept its responsibility for, let's say, rape in the classroom. While I don't think the analogy is precise, this is a form of rape from our point of view. So we sued NYU, and we're quite serious, and we leveled a legal complaint against them without discussing first, drawing the parallel of the need to hit the mule over the head to get his attention. I think in all probability, although we don't know precisely at this point, that we will not litigate this case. NYU does not want to litigate it because it regards it as quite unwinnable. We will be perfectly willing to have, in effect, a bilateral settlement if NYU will cooperate with us on publicizing the result so that we can use it to good effect in future discussions with other universities. So much for that. Well, I hope, Mr. Rosenblatt, that we've covered some of the items on your checklist, and I think we are now entirely at your convenience to respond to questions. Yes.
I may sound like the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing, but you sounded so vehement about our acquisition policy, and I'm familiar with the library statement on investigation, and I know what our regulation says. But there is a provision for special relief, and I guess I'm not aware of it, but I'm applying it very tightly.
The special relief is you can give 1 instead of 2.
Not
But
necessarily. It's individually tailored to a much broader range. I have the same objection. I think part of your duty should be to explain to your people some of the remedies that they may have available.
Well, the problem I have, and I'm glad you bring this up, but the problem that these people are having is, and it may be just an individual person, the special relief has not been granted. In the particular case where the congressman was involved, they had written letters, they had retained an attorney, they had tried to get special relief and were told this volume is so seminal and is so important, we must have at least 1 copy, and the publisher said to comply with it, we would go bankrupt. And you know, Mary Beth's shaking her head, so you must have heard too. The congressman was Dellums. It was all right. There are cases. It's only when they become a horror story when special relief has not been granted. And in one case, the publisher had already sold every copy and was living in day-to-day fear, what will happen when the demand is served on us?
Did he ask for special relief? Did he point out the facts?
Yes,
And it
yes,
was denied?
yes, and they were denied. Yes.
It was found that this was very central to the collection of the library funds.
But not central enough for the library to pay for it, and that was the problem. It was very central to the library, and even if it's a personal hardship and the company must go bankrupt, the library will have it and not pay. And that
I
was,
would agree that is unreasonable.
it wasn't, well, but the library did say that, yes.
I see you in an advisory capacity, since this is a bit not no, what I was saying, she was just saying to me bankruptcy was not alleged, and that was true. It was not. It was just said it would be, it was a $15,000 book and that it would work.
That's somewhat different. Yeah.
Part of a $1.5 million publishing venture going away.
Jackie?
Well, maybe I'm asking, are you an advisory capacity to make book publishers aware of the law?
Yes, yes, yes.
If they know that this is a requirement that they're gonna have to meet, why it's not considered up front when they're, you know,
Exactly.
planning process and find some way to absorb the cost? You know, I just don't understand, you know, your defense. I can see maybe on one or two occasions, but as a rule, it sounds like you're fighting the best edition requirement, period.
If I may add an adjunct to that, I agree with every word that was said. To use the old cliche, everything is a trade-off. But this library, the purpose of that provision being put in was to enrich the National Library, and that has to be considered. Do we have a national treasure here, or don't we? And do we want to enrich it, or don't we? And in line with what she was saying, provision should be made in the future where they keep this in mind.
Well, as I said, I raised an issue that's causing concern among publishers, and I will be meeting with Bob Davis afterwards to discuss this. There are trade-offs, that's true, and the publishers had felt, in these particular cases where we were getting the complaints, that if they had a trade edition, if they had an edition that didn't have the signed original in it, because people were paying for the artwork with the artwork that was signed by the artist, if they had an edition that would enhance the National Library, provide reference material and scholarship material and something that was of value, they could give that to the Library of Congress and not the special gold leaf, coated, fancy, leather-bound editions with the signed original. And it was that the library said, we don't want the version that you sell to the common people. We want the one that the people are paying $5,000 for.
Newtown.
Good, thank you.
I noticed you read off a list of items that are of present concern with reference to CO regulations. With the situation of many of your members getting involved in the publishing of computer software and databases, has your association also taken a position on Copyright Office deposit requirements, trade secrets, and the implication of deposits?
Not yet. We have been asked to tell our members what's going on in that area, but because the decision of the board to, in a sense, redefine publishing was just made, we haven't yet got a committee that's focusing on software concerns. We have a lot of members who are calling up and saying we're concerned, but we have not taken a position yet.
Carol, does that relate to your role in helping your members determine what constitutes publication for an online work? At what point is it published? There's a hard copy out there.
We only tell them what your regulations say, and we raise the fact that there are questions. And we always say that putting notice on does not necessarily mean that you have published, and we do encourage the use of notice. We've been encouraging use of notice as a way to keep people aware. But other than that, we know that there are a lot of questions, and we have not yet got a forum to discuss them in, to get an AAP view. Yes?
Does the publisher have to join your organization before you will, say, deal with them, say with a copyright office, if someone has a problem? Do they have to be one of your 300 members, or do you deal with other publishers as well as a sort of an umbrella action?
We deal with other publishers as well. My job for AAP, that for which I am paid, is to provide copyright information under the theory that an informed public complies with the law. And therefore, be it an author, an educator, a librarian, or another publisher, if they call with a request for information, I do it. I provide the information. I have several books that I use. I have several resource people. As you know, Steve read that I am the director of the International Copyright Information Center. What that is it's almost nothing. It's a title. But UNESCO, when accepting the compulsory licenses in the 1971 modifications to the UCC asked that every developed country have some vehicle to help third world countries in clearing reprint and translation rights. Because the United States has to have such a focal point, I'm it. And the Copyright Office cooperates with me, the Search Service. I don't know if anybody's here from Search, but I get 24-hour turnaround. No one else in the United States or the world, other than, I guess, the Register, can get that fast service. I call up Search, and whatever else is being done is dropped, is the way I see it, because otherwise how could they call me back within 5 minutes? And I give them a whole day to find out who the copyright holder is. If a third world country wants to find this information, because I'm listed in every international publication, I also get requests from developed countries. They have a book, they want to reprint it or translate it, and they can't find the copyright holder because the copyright holder listed in the copyright notice no longer exists. The transfers have been filed with the Copyright Office. We check whether the copyright has been renewed. We check. We find them, the copyright holder, using every resource you have, and we get that information back so the negotiations can continue. And then it is the publisher who negotiates directly. If someone does not respond in a timely fashion, again, these third world countries can say, I wrote to publisher X asking for reprint rights and a license. I haven't gotten an answer. Please intercede. And we pick up the phone and we intercede. We also run the Public Broadcasting Expediting Center. When Section 118 was drafted in the law, literary material were not included in a public broadcasting exemption. Instead, the parties negotiated an agreement. And part of the agreement is that there is a place in the United States, me again, where a public broadcasting entity that can't get permission from a copyright holder can call. And whether it's an author or a publisher, I pick up the phone and say, how come you didn't answer the request in a timely fashion? Please, you must call this guy, tell him if he can, if he can't, and what the fee is, but do it now, because otherwise we'll see a compulsory license in the law. So, you know, Public Broadcasting Expediting Center, InSync, these are all other little hats we do. But yes, we help everybody. Yes?
Does AAP participate in any way in dealing with illegitimate publishers? For instance, you run into this.
Pirates?
Not pirates, but people who will, for instance, sell subscription type publications. In addition, they'll come out in multiple volumes to libraries, for which the libraries never receive anything.
You mean just fraud? You mean where by illegitimate you mean there's no, in fact, no publication?
Right.
It's just it's a con game.
Yes.
Well, we don't have any specific responsibility for it.
No, I realize that, but I thought.
And I'm not sure that we coped very well with it, but if we hear about it, we tell the police, I think.
In regard to industry-wide generic coding, what are publishers planning to do about that kind of standardizing for consumers? I think we're aware that in 5 years we might be getting Time Magazine, New Yorker on floppy disk, but should I buy an Apple, a TRN? They are standardized.
Yes, I'm sorry. I forgot I'm supposed to repeat the questions. You'll have a lot of answers with no questions. You can play Johnny Carson, the great Karnak. This question was, what are we doing or what do we envision being done concerning generic coding for the consumer? The question was, although Time magazine and other mass market magazines may be available in floppy disk, what should the consumer do today? What type of microcomputer should be purchased in order to be able to read the new products? Our system is dealing with authors, publishers, and compositors, the three links in the chain for book publishing and journal publishing. The mass market magazines who are considering selling a product to the public are looking at this in a whole nother way. There are such things as black boxes, and there are such things as CPM software that will work on multiple different types of equipment. That's a hardware-software concern when you're dealing with the numbers that the consumer market is dealing with. Right now, it is a problem for our publishers who are creating software because they have to make software that will work on the Apple, on the Tandy TRS-80 series, and on the Commodore PET. And having three computers, three micros out there, and the Texas Instrument, which is taking plug-in cartridges, is causing a lot of money, a lot of expense to publishers, and is causing some publishers to rethink their L-High program, to the creation of computer software for the L-High market until there is compatibility. But right now, the publishers are publishing 4 or 3 products because that's the only way to face it and to cope with it.
Two things. The first on that, which I wanted to ask anyway, it's fine for publishing for all those people to agree on it, but the question is, and we've had discussions with the industry, and we're now talking about in excess of 20 extremely successful computer companies. The industry, I suspect, will want to maintain proprietary formats. If they're not willing to agree with you, it's not going to happen.
Yes, it will. Let me explain why it will. The question is, what are we doing about the industry? The industry is participating. The microcomputer industry is participating on the American National Standards Institute X3J6 committee. And they are participating, and we have talked to our antitrust attorney about this, and the theory was that our system will help the software industry because people will not be tied in to one particular program. They will be able to use their WordStar or their VisiCalc or their AppleSoft or whatever they're using on their particular thing, but they will type using only the alphas and the numerics, which are standardized. The ASCII keyboard is now standardized. So it will not hurt them. It'll make any one of them work.
Actually, it will hurt them because they lose their competitive advantage. IBM will lose its competitive advantage, which it has by virtue of its huge bankroll, if you use it on anything. Be that as it may. I didn't quite understand the answer to Jackie's question, which is, does your organization actively educate its members and things like that, as opposed to just more or less answering specific questions?
Yes.
About some of our things.
We conduct, our education program is what is at question, and the answer is we have an active seminar and workshop and education program. We also publish a 3-time-a-year publication called the Copyright Circle. We call it a circle because we give information to the people who subscribe to the Copyright Circle, but we ask them to give us information back. What are your concerns? And it was because we asked them, our readers, and we have 400 readers, and we don't limit readership to AAP members or to publishers. We say anybody who wants it gets it free. We've said that up till now because we felt our job was to send out information. This may change as the economy changes. But at the moment, we have been giving the Copyright Circle out. And in response to the last issue of the Copyright Circle, we got back 6 letters from different people saying, we have a problem, what are you doing about? And we did not yet meet with the Library of Congress and Copyright Office acquisitions people. We just got these letters, and in New York had a meeting and said, yes, this is indeed an issue that deserves more exploration on our part because it's something that's concerning publishers. Unless we know that they're upset by it, we're not going to create a problem. We're not going to come and complain. You know, when the law was drafted, we did not object to 407 at all. AAP is not on record as saying anything because the idea of enhancing the national collection and our cultural wealth was important. And we saw it and recognized it and said there was no problem. When some member publishers, when American branches of some foreign publishers started being served with demands, we heard one complaint, and we said, well, let's wait and see if this is universal. If this is just one company, then we're not going to jump up and down because we're not anybody's single stalking horse. We are a trade association for the entire industry. If a problem has universal applicability, if it affects all of our members, we get involved. If it affects 1 or 2, we say to the 1 or 2, we're sorry, this is not a general problem. We can give you the name of our copyright counsel, you can deal with your own attorney, but we can't do anything on it. But when something starts showing up. And so what we did is when we got 6 letters in response, we raised it at a copyright committee meeting in New York and said, we have received 6 letters. Does this affect any of the others of you? And then we got 4 more letters. So now we feel that we can talk, and that's why, as I said, I brought this up because I think it's important for you to know that there are people out there who are concerned. I will be talking with Bob if there's something we can do to help everybody to compromise, then we will. If it becomes a problem that's not manageable, you know, there'll have to be something that's done. There'll have to be some give. But at this point, we just want to explore it more. And all I'm saying is it is a cause of concern in the publishing industry for some publishers. Is that answer the question? Okay. Yes?
You did mention one of the concerns about filing multi-page transfers and
Contracts.
And the filing is the 2 pages.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming that those 2 pages would not have the titles and the works involved.
Oh, there were 2 things I mentioned. One was, how can publishers protect the confidentiality that's in a contract, and could they just have 1 page that has the signature of the publisher and the signature of the author, but the specific royalty rates and special terms kept out? And the other was group registration for periodicals, for multi-issue periodicals. So those were 2 different questions, and on the confidentiality, that was just a 1-page form that had both signatures. On the group registration, the theory was that if you are a publisher who publishes a periodical that comes out many times, maybe a weekly, and it is burdensome to pay $10 a week for this issue, which is only $520 a year, but if you have 100 such periodicals, and some of the societies, the not-for-profit societies like the Institute for IEEE, Electronics and Engineering, I can't do it, but IEEE and the American Institute of Physics and the American Chemical Society have 40 or 50 different periodicals that they publish for all of their members on different elements of the problem. And when you multiply 50 times 520, it is a significant portion of the publication's budget. And so some of these not-for-profit organizations and the lower budget periodical people were saying to us AAP, why don't we just stop registering? And we said to them, try not to stop registering, but maybe we can find a way that you can register, but at a lower fee, by grouping them together, either a year at a time, you know, in bound volumes that would help the National Library's collection. You wouldn't have to send them out to the bindery. But then the statute says you must register within 3 months to get all the of publication, to get all the statutory benefits. So maybe let's give 4 times a year, bind together everything that's 3 months, but it would be the same title journal, the same publisher, all the information would be the same, and they just say volume 7, issues 1, 2, 3, and 4, volume 8, issues, you know, whatever else, all bound together so that you didn't have to have, they don't list the articles now necessarily.
I just wanted to point out that the Library of Congress has a history of negotiations with industry. For example, with the NPAA, the Library of Congress worked out not only the single deposit rather than 2 copy requirement, but they also worked out a possibility for return of the entire copy for works that are much less valuable than the $15,000 work you were talking about. So there seems to be some space for negotiation rather than getting each other by loggerheads.
We prefer to negotiate also. We really do get along very well with the Library of Congress. And I was only mentioning what's on my plate for this year, the things that we do intend to talk to the library about, things that we feel concerned and that it's time to talk, raise the issues with the library and see if there is room for negotiation.
I did have a question about the adequacy of copyright to protect publishers and other copyright owners' interests. It seems to me that the question, but you may see it differently, that the question is one of enforcement, practical enforcement, rather than the actual adequacy of the law. You do have those 5 rights, and they do seem to be to me, adequate to cover it. You have the right of display, you have the right to say yes, actually, unless there is a compulsory license attached to that particular right. So is it a question of the inadequacy of copyright, or is it a question of practical enforcement? For example, the fair use problem that we have in the Betamax case, or for example, the problem that Adonis-like works are having, because there's only going to be one copy and everybody's going to be able to use it.
Do you want me to repeat the question?
I can.
Well, summarized, I think the question is the copyright law as a law adequate to protect copyrights, or is it simply an inadequacy of enforcement measures that makes the law inadequate from a certain point of view? Well, it's very hard, of course, to disentangle the two. I think we would agree that the law, although it has some ambiguities in it, is much better than what existed before 1976. But on the other hand, we face this problem that I think is inherent in the protection of all intangible property rights. It's very, very difficult to enforce. In the days before the photocopying machine, we always relied on really the goodwill of the users, the sense of proportion of the users, and there was relatively little scope for devastating damage. I mean, copying had to be done by hand, was usually done by a scholar or a researcher, and unless somebody were engaged in large-scale plagiarism or piracy, it wasn't a problem. But now you have the Xerox machine, which is part of the air we breathe, and it's a convenience. And I think even the most conscientious people around regard it as a convenience and really don't stop to think of whether there are legal rights involved in what they're doing. This is certainly true of professors, let's say at NYU. Nobody is more insistent upon the receipt of their own royalties, where professors are authors, as you know, and yet when it comes to copying somebody else's stuff, they just don't make the mental connection. I think that's the problem, and it seems to us that it's profoundly aggravated as we get farther into the electronic revolution, because more and more opportunities for mindless violation will occur. Yes, sir.
You know, it seems like probably that this problem has existed since the time that people were copying things by hand and then movable type was invented. Yeah. And you know, you've broadened the scope of your organization. You've taken in a lot of people who are into software and that sort of thing. But I think always that copyright is a concept of property rights, but it's always been a question of adjusting it as technological advances are made. And historically, I don't think contracts have ever, day one, have ever alone been a solution to the problem. And, you know, there's always going to be a copyright law, I think, one form or another. It may not be quite the way it is now, but it seems like it's going to be very difficult to protect those rights without some sort of law. And it may be a question of how does the law react in a more rapid fashion to new technological breakthroughs. But at some point, I think that's going to come about.
Well, I won't try to repeat that question, but I will say that I don't think anybody, certainly not from our side here, is advocating the elimination of the copyright law. Quite the contrary. I was really just making the kind of groping statement that I wonder, looking off into the next several years, whether the concept of copyright is adequate. It may be, although nobody wants it, that we may have to go to something like comprehensive compulsory licenses.
Well, I've talked with a couple of publishers occasionally, and it seems like there is some confusion in their mind about it. They feel that they, through writing tighter and tighter contracts, that is the ultimate solution. But seems like, you know, they just don't quite understand everything involved.
No, I think that the problem is not with their contractual partners. The problem really is with the myriad numbers of users who have no contractual relationship at all, but who are their readers, their buyers, their the ultimate users of the information.
I was gonna say, I think Mr. Hoop's statement is one that an awful lot of people are saying. As the publisher cannot control the various means of dissemination that they could in the past, they worry about how they're going to get the compensation so that they can bring out and afford to bring out the creator's work. And I think there's an awful lot of people who are saying what he is.
Yeah.
And it's noted even in, you know, the Library of Congress in their optical disc kind of paper and the think tank paper that they've done. So I think it's a very common concern.
Well, it is, and it's a, and again, it's in a sense it's not new. But if you drive this argument to its logical conclusion, you run the risk of saying that if you can't, if creators of material, and here I speak of authors really more primarily than publishers, if they cannot earn an honest living by spending their life at creating things because their works are being pirated the moment they hit the streets, then there is a tendency for that creativity to dry up. I think in a very limited sense, we're beginning to see a lot of people now who are more and more discouraged about writing books, qua books. The same kind of talent sees more opportunity, let's say, in writing television scripts or movie scripts or things that have a more immediate upfront return from their point of view. Well, we've certainly enjoyed this very much, and I hope we've been marginally useful to you.
Yes, I want to thank you very much.